In order to prepare students for the demands of college and career, the core standards demand many things. And at their heart is a demand that students read more difficult text with great care, understanding evidence from that text, and then express what they've learned in speaking and listening and in writing. And many teachers and others have asked us to show them a model of what that might look like. What might it look like to read a rich, difficult work of literary nonfiction and ask the kind of high-quality questions that would meet the standards that have been designed. The standards do not define how anyone should teach, nor do they define any specific curriculum. They allow for a remarkable diversity, innovation, and experimentation of several approaches that most deliver students who are indeed able to read complex text at a high level, gather evidence from it, and write about it clearly. But today what I wanted to offer you was one picture by looking together with you at King's letter from Birmingham Jail, at a marvelous work of literary nonfiction, and what it might mean to attend to the text carefully with questions that draw on evidence from that text, and how rich work that can be. Again, as only one model among many of looking at the letter. If we were together to begin reading the letter, and I'll say that we're going to move rather quickly now, but reading it together it would actually be far slower. And part of the core standards is daring to take the time and space that a great text like this deserves. But if we're beginning to read the letter, we might ask the question about the first paragraph. We might say, based on the first paragraph, and the first paragraph of King's letter alone, what might you know about the letter that he received? And you'll notice that I've jumped right into the center of the text. I just want to begin a discussion of it. And so I'll read it out loud and we can consider the question together. He says, "My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely." He goes on to explain that seldom does he pause to answer criticism of his work, but in this case he will. But we can see from reading that with some care that he's been accused, and it's put in quotes, of acting in a way that is unwise and untimely. It might be that a careful reader further notices his introduction, his phrase, "dear fellow clergymen." That reveals both something about who wrote in the letter and King himself. That is, it is clergyman writing to a clergyman. But that also might be picked up later because he emphasizes it further in the letter to come. So first we begin to orient ourselves toward the letter by understanding how King frames his argument in the face of the argument he's received. A next wonderful question might be, what are the 3 reasons King gives for being in Birmingham, and how is the evidence that supports them different? If you look closely at paragraph 2 of the letter, you'll notice he describes his organization, the several core offices that he has, and he concludes at the end, "I am here because I have organizational ties here." He concludes that he's been invited here. It is a kind of organizational and almost legal justification for his presence in Birmingham. But his second paragraph makes more of a historical and theological argument. He says, but more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their village and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so I am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom far beyond my hometown. So you see in this second argument, students may not know all the words like Greco-Roman and Tarsus and a whole range of phrases, but they must grasp the gist that King is putting himself in a line of preachers, in a line of history and theological discussion where there's a traveling preacher who announces their claim. And that highlights that earlier, "my dear fellow clergymen," that we talked about earlier. But the third argument, his third reason for being in Birmingham, is his most ringing and his most famous. He says, "Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. You may recall these words, they're quite famous. And the question we might ask is, what kind of argument is this, and how does it fit in with the rest of what King has said so far? It's clearly a moral argument. He creates a set of moral claims about what's right and wrong. And he says that injustice in any one place is injustice everywhere. And if you think not only about what kind of argument it is, but how it fits in, it's quite radical. His first argument says, it's okay that I'm here in Birmingham because I was invited to be so, and I have an organization here. But his third argument says, more daringly, there's no such thing as an outsider in matters of injustice, because injustice anywhere makes me an insider to that injustice. I participate in it. So King's third argument opposes the very idea that there can be an outsider in a question of justice. There is no way students can witness the accumulated power of King's argument without paying this kind of close attention to precisely how he argues and how they build on one another. And then we might pause to ask, what is the evidence King uses to support this very bold claim that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere? And the answer has to be that within that paragraph he offers no evidence at all. It's a series of assertions. And when you recognize that he's gone now very far out on a limb, you begin to understand the rest of the structure of this great letter, because in a way the rest of the letter is all supporting this daring claim in his complaint about the white moderates, in the other discussions of the hidden discriminations he discusses later, are all ways that he sketches the web of mutuality that he claims binds us. But until those paragraphs come, we have no justification yet for his bold claim. In the next paragraph, you'll notice he begins, this is now paragraph 6, he says, you deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. Once again, the very first question we asked, what can you know from this letter about the letter he received? Now he tells us something not only about what was in the letter he received, but King tells us what was not in that letter. That is, he accuses its authors of excluding the most important information, which is the suffering that provoked the demonstrations. So rich, great questions that may seem simple, like what can you know about the letter that King received based on this letter alone, allow kids to continue to read with care and return to the text to make rich inferences to understand both what they can directly understand and infer from what King has written. There's a later paragraph in the letter also famous, all about the word tension. He talks about the need for a nonviolent tension, a creative tension, which is not the tension of aggressiveness and war, but the tension that he links to creativity. And there's perhaps no finer study of a bit of academic vocabulary than King's paragraph on the word tension and precisely what he takes it to mean and what it must mean in this context. An excellent way to deeply understand what an author is doing is to, in this close way, examine how they treat a single word that is fundamental to their thinking and exactly how they define it and describe it within the context of their work. And that offers us another wonderful insight into the letter. We could go on. We could discuss just and unjust law and how King treats it and the examples he gives. And it may be that the very discussion we've just had would not take one classroom, but several classrooms to methodically work through the letter with this kind of care. But I hope this is enough to show that what's at stake in the standards and what's at stake reading carefully is not just reading and writing, but truly encountering the depth and richness of thought in other minds, so it can serve as both model and inspiration, so it can challenge us, and so that we can challenge it, but challenge it responsibly, knowing its details, knowing its movements, not just discussing whether we're for or against nonviolence, but the specifics of King's arguments and claims. And this way, we really encounter a great depth of thought, prepare students for more difficult challenges to come.